Thank you for joining us for our panel discussion on how our stories need every chapter. Michelle Wingle and Robin Johnson will be guiding the conversation. Please welcome the following experts to our panel. Jeffery C Olsen is a best-selling author who inspires audiences internationally with his intriguing story of perseverance and inner strength captured in his book, Knowing. After a horrific automobile accident took the lives of his wife and youngest son, also inflicting multiple life-threatening injuries to Jeff, including the amputation of his left leg, he found the courage to survive over 18 surgeries to eventually heal both physically and emotionally, and to thrive in his career and community contributions. Jeff has appeared on many international and national television and radio programs sharing his insights. William Paul Young, author of the novels The Shack, Crossroads, Eve, and recently released nonfiction Lies We Believe About God, was born a Canadian and raised among a Stone Age tribe by his missionary parents in the highlands of what was Netherlands New Guinea, now West Papua. He suffered great loss as a child and young adult, and his journey has been both incredible and unbearable. His story is one of love and forgiveness, reconciliation, grace and community, transformational healing, and unexpected joy. Bridget Cook-Birch is a New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author whose books have been showcased on Oprah, Dateline, Good Morning America, and more. Bridget has helped hundreds of people write their stories. As a successful entrepreneur, she built a multi-million-dollar trucking company. With all her success, one of her most fulfilling life callings has been as executive director of the Sheroes United, a nonprofit that supports and empowers women and families. The power of words transformed her life. She believes in that power to change the world. Please enjoy the conversation.
We're so excited to share this final panel for the day with you. And all three of these are amazing authors, successful authors. And we started a conversation the other night that I'd like to start with the same question we talked about, but what was life like before you owned your own story?
Wow, who's going to go first?
You are up.
Oh. That's all right. I went last on the speaking. I'll go first on the panel. What was life like before? For me, it was difficult and confusing. I knew what I knew, but I didn't know how to share it. And quite honestly, I hadn't learned to love myself yet. I was wondering about saying, where's all that love I felt over there? And gosh, the reason I loved Alex's song, I was suicidal at times. I just want to go home. I don't want to be doing this. And although life had rolled on in a beautiful way, I mean, I eventually remarried, we adopted 2 boys, I was rebuilding a family, but there was this huge gaping hole in me saying, where's love? Where's love? And I was always looking for it out there, out there. How can I be validated? Gosh, if Tanya, my wife, just loves me enough, maybe I'll be okay, or if the boys, or my job, or the accolades. And it was this huge Band-Aid to my own lack of self-love. And it wasn't until I literally realized that the love was here. It wasn't out there. There was nowhere to look for it. I would never find it. I mean, the kingdom of God is within you. And when I realized that, then I could share my story. Then I could reach out and do what I do because there was no fear. There was no judgment. I knew that. But suddenly there was no judgment of myself by myself, and that was the turning point.
How long did that take you?
Oh, wow. 10 years?
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
10 years. It was a decade.
11, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, my book came out 12 years after the accident, so there was 2 years just learning to walk and trying to put the pieces together, but it was a decade-long journey.
Well, and I had some interesting things because,
I wrote about former skinhead, and then I wrote about the daughter of a serial killer, and for some reason people didn't understand that they were transformational stories, right? So I had the opportunity with Lisa Nichols from The Secret to write a chapter, and I wrote something more fabulous than probably anything that I had ever written. It was called Out of the Web of the Spider, and it was about getting past abuse and anger, and I didn't publish it. It was like they loved it. It was the first of the book. It was supposed to be, everything, and they were just so excited about it. Didn't get to go in. So then I ended up writing about my near-death experience. I had just a couple of days to get it in, all the way at the back of the book. And I was so proud of it. Because a lot of times when we put something in a book, people think that it has to be true, and it means holding sometimes someone in a space and not giving them an opportunity to grow. And I will tell you, transformation is possible for any one of us. So me, before that, I was a mess. And after, this journey, I'm so excited to be alive every day. But I will say that sometimes people won't get you. When you're on fire, when you're excited about life, when you're delighted like Jeff to be alive and to recognize how much there is in life. It's a wonderful thing. I have a beautiful husband who absolutely lets me be who I am. And then he makes sure that there's a GPS and gas in the car, and he takes care of things because I'm, and I do want to share one thing. I was, when I was running my trucking company, and I was just starting to get this, like how cool this life of spirituality and owning it, because I was trying to be professional and put my woo back there somewhere, right? So here's profession, and then here's spirituality, and I was cutting myself off from a deep part of who I was. I read Gay Hendricks' book, The Big Leap, and I was like, in order for me to have greater and greater periods of happiness, I get to own my story. And I get to be who I am, and I can't cut my spirituality off. Just like these gentlemen, holy cow. And so greater and greater periods of happiness. And then I had my business partner. We had one of our truckers got in an accident, and I was just so grateful. He's alive. No one was hurt. Everybody was okay. And so I just start doing great things like, we're going to use this for training, and it's going to be fine. And I figuring out what to do with the insurance, and my business partner got angry. And he's like, I'm down here trying to solve this problem, and you're up in the frickin' clouds smoking weed with Gandhi. And I was so offended, right? So I get down on his level for about 5 minutes. And then I'm like, I'd rather be up in the clouds smoking weed with Gandhi. So, you get to pick and choose who you get to hang out with. But I want to just say, here in Utah, I'm sitting between two men who have introduced me more to the divine feminine than any men I've ever met. And I have some glorious friends. Thank you.
Thank you.
In a nutshell, I might not have been a piece of shit, but I was full of shit. Right? Big difference, right? One is about who the truth of your being is, and the other is about all the ways that you hide and lie to yourself, and how that spills over. If you'd have been around me, you'd have thought, he's pretty cool, but something smells, because I was a good performer. I'm a missionary kid, preacher's kid, firstborn, and turns out creative and pretty smart, which only empowered my ability to hide, right? So I was, at the same time as I was trying to do the right thing. I really was. I wasn't trying to be duplicitous. I just didn't know how to get from where I was to what I could see. And I could see way more than I was capable of living, right? And so I'm begging God, please, would you just heal me? Just do it without anybody else finding out about it, And but no contentment. Joy never spent the night. Joy was never a constant companion, never spent the night. And so I was just in turmoil, but I maintained a controlled exterior for the most part. And I was a good dad. I was a good husband, if we wanted to compare notes. But it was because I read the books. I did not have a capacity to love. And but I had read the books about it, so I knew what it was supposed to look like. And I wanted, I maybe by doing it enough, it would become real. But that's sidestepping the processing that you need to do so that it is real. Yeah.
So in that space, could you have written your story?
No. If I wrote The Shack in my 30s, it would have absolutely killed me. But I couldn't have written it anyway, because I need it. People say, how long did it take you to write the book? I say 50 years, And the actual putting it on paper was easy. It was the 50 years that were a lot of work. And by the time I got there, and this is important, people need to understand that in my 11 years, dismantling and rebuilding, when I finally got there, everything that mattered to me was in place before I wrote the book, right? Identity, worth, value, significance, security, meaning, purpose, destiny, community, and love, all in place. So the book hasn't given me any of that, right? What it has given us is an invitation to walk on the holy ground of other people's stories. But I don't need this, if it all went away tomorrow, I'd be great, because I was already content, and we had nothing. I mean, we'd lost our home, we'd lost our cars. I was working 3 jobs. I wrote in part The Shack for a Christmas present for my kids because I had nothing else to give them that year. And the timing was right. It was like, I'm finally healthy. Okay, I can do this, what Kim has been asking me to do. So, yeah.
So Bridget, help us understand why that's significant, why the healing has to come first before the story writing.
Well, I would actually say the healing is a part of the journey, and then there is the deepening. So often the authors that I see might have a different journey than what these two will say. Oftentimes they need to throw up on the page. They have to write for themselves first. They have to get it all out. All the anger, all the jealousy, all the rage, all the frustration, all the sadness, all the hurt, the shame,
and
especially.
I did that over years, right? I mean, that was part of my experience in writing, was that I did do some of that over a course. I mean, I wrote the stuff I had to burn.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's exactly the stuff you got to burn. Because most of the time, and here's the interesting thing, most people lose those manuscripts. Like if they think that's the one and they have a deep inner core of integrity, they'll lose their manuscript or something else will happen. That one was meant to just bleh, right? And then the deepening, which these gentlemen have just expressed to you. And sometimes authors will get really frustrated because, if you look at the world out there, you're supposed to have a book in 60 days, right? Well, not a deep book. Not a book that your legacy is in. Not one that bears your soul and is vulnerable and can actually give to the world what you deserve. The deepening is where the beauty comes in, because now you can be real enough with yourself that you can be real enough with others to make a significant difference.
Yeah, I couldn't have written the book in my process because I was not throwing up on the page. I was just throwing up everywhere else in life. And I was pretty good at masking it too. And it doesn't, it doesn't necessarily take 10 years, but it can change in the twinkling of an eye. But it's the self-realization. It's that moment. And moments are sacred. I speak about moments all the time. But I can tell you where I was standing and what went on when I knew. And knowing, which is, the title of my book, that's what it's about. It's about that self-realization. It's about that self-discovery in spite of anything that happens, but really the personal journey of just put one foot in front of the other and keep going, because you're going to end up right where you're meant to be. There's so much self-judgment about, well, I should do this and I should do that. My oldest son teases me and says, "Stop shooting all over yourself, Dad." But but yeah, until I had the self-love and the self-forgiveness, I couldn't write the book. I couldn't even talk about it because I was still holding on to that guilt of I was driving the car. And then there was the guilt of all the things I did to cover up that gaping hole that was looking for all that love. And then there was a question, how could God possibly love me? Was that real? Mm-hmm. And yet, in that moment when it's like, of course it was, and I'll promise you that was far more real than this. This is the weird, foggy dream. That was reality. That's what I loved about the shack, by the way. Yeah, that's what's real, and when I came to terms with that and embraced it, then it was easy to just be honest, because that's where the power is.
Well, thank you, Bridget, for bringing this up, because this is coming to my mind. But you brought up the divine feminine. I would love each of you to speak. I would love the men to speak to the divine masculine. And I would love to hear your interpretation of the divine feminine. I want you to own that story. Paul?
I don't understand the question exactly. So maybe you can expand it a little bit for me or start with someone else. Yeah, please help.
Help. So within yourself, did you have to find that divine masculine? What is that for you? For you?
Oh, good. Okay, that's helpful. To me, the question that is far deeper is what it means to be human. That's the deeper question for me. I think masculinity and femininity are both expressions of humanity, but there's a whole spectrum along that line, right? It's almost like a circle, and I think the polarity or the binary kind of ways that we've looked at things have actually divided the human race so much so that anybody that didn't fit the definitions on either end of the spectrum, they didn't belong. And we've done so much damage. A lot of the confusion that we have about our masculinity and femininity, I think, come from that kind of binary thinking. And so I did this thing when I worked at one time. I worked for a church, and none of them have ever asked me to work for them again, actually. And but I was 22 at the time, and I was working with the 20s to 30-year-olds, right? And we had the going thing in Portland, and we had anywhere from 300 to 700 kids on a Friday night. And it was alive. That's where I met Kim. Kim walks in one night with 2 of her 5 sisters, and I'm in charge. First time she's been there, and I notice her, and I'm in charge. So I immediately changed what we were planning to do so we could break up into groups of 2 and pray for each other. So, yeah, power corrupts. So, but I did this thing. This is back when I'm 22 years old, because this issue of how we related to women within the context of church and religion had driven me nuts since I was in high school. It just didn't make any sense to me. And I had done already a lot of work on it. So I did this survey, and I listed a whole bunch of personality characteristics. And then I gave it to all the kids, and I said, look, kids being my age. And then I said, I want you to take each of these, and on the right-hand side there is a box for, this is a masculine trait, this is a feminine trait, and this is both or neither or whatever. Both, I think. And then I said also, who do you consider the most masculine person in the Old Testament and the New Testament, most feminine, et cetera, right? What I did was, and unbeknownst to them, is I buried all the fruit of the Spirit in that list, because I was really curious as to what was the paradigm that people were looking through. Only one of the fruit of the Spirit came out masculine, right? And it was long-suffering. But, like, a married man, okay. So had to, it was a setup. So what was fascinating to me was that the fruit of the Spirit are supposed to be absolutely applicable as an expression of masculinity or femininity, because it's the truth of our being, right? And yet here it comes so swayed on the one side. And then what was funny was people like David and Samson ended up the guys, you know, in the Old Testament. And Peter, you know, which kind of makes sense if you think about it in a twisted sort of way. But wasn't Jesus, you know, as the expression of masculinity? So that to me, you see Jesus, you're looking at the character and nature of God, but you're looking at the character and nature of human and also male. And so Jesus is playing with children when the guys won't, you know, or touching the leper when everybody's afraid of, talking theology with the woman at the well, which was like, he didn't even talk theology with the Pharisees, you know. And so you begin to get a different sense. And my issue was looking at the world and seeing all the damage that men had done. And even Scripture saying, you know, the brokenness enters through one man. And that reframing my understanding of the storyline. So to take it one more step, I've done 40 years of work on the Genesis story, right? Came out in Eve. And Eve was the hardest thing I've ever done. I was trying to write, put 40 years of scholarship into a work of fiction accessible to a teenager, right? So my main character is Lily, and she is a 16-year-old trafficked girl. And it was the only way I could write through that lens. But part of my work on Genesis was to say, look, there's a couple issues, one that has come up a number of times in the conversations today, and that is the issue of aloneness. It's the first not good. So anything that is not good does not originate with God. And the first not good is aloneness before the woman is even brought out of the man in the story, right? And so that is, in the Hebrew, it says in his separation. So the delusion of separation begins in Genesis, where Adam is turned away from the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in that storyline. And so he's turned away from God, where he found what? Identity, worth, value, significance, security, meaning, purpose, destiny, community, and love, right? It's in that face-to-face relationship. Well, the warning to her is your turning is going to be to the man, right? This teshuka is the epistrophe is the Greek word. Teshuka is the Hebrew word. It's your desire. It's translated your desire, which is really a bad translation. Pagnino, a monk who hated women and sex in the Middle Ages, decided to make it desire. It had never been desire. It's to turn, right? So her turning is going to be to the man. His turning is away already. But what does he turn to? He turns to the ground and the works of his hands, not even relational, right? Her turning is to a relationship. So at least that models the character of God, who is a relational being. And what does she turn to him for? Identity, like to the man. Identity, worth, value, significance, security, meaning, purpose, destiny, community, and love. And he's going like, hell no. Yeah? You know, thorns and thistle, you know, his version is fight or flight. And he'll rule over you. You catch shame in a set of expectations and you're going to get fight or flight. Her, she turns to the man, he turns to the ground. He's looking at work and performance and production as identity, worth, and value, etc., right? And it's like the call of the gospel is return. Come back face to face. So part of my journey in terms of the divine masculine is to recognize that my turning has been to performance and to the works of my hands and to territory and property. And the movement back to relationship is absolutely critical and is a violation of aloneness, right? And this becomes really key because Adam he's expelled. I mean, he is escorted out of the garden, but if you read Genesis 3, she's not. But our mythology says that she is. No, she's not. To her is given the promise of the one that would crush the serpent's head. She has to follow him out. And in the storyline, when she has her first baby, she says, I've begotten a man-child, the Lord. That's what the Hebrew says. The English is with the help of, but it's not in the Hebrew. But she thought Cain was going to be the one that finally solved it. Because, I mean, frankly, think about it. Who could imagine that God could bring into being a male savior without the involvement of the flesh or the will of a male? I mean, really. And that's what Mary then becomes, right? So that the sense is that Eve could have been Mary if she'd have stayed in trust rather than turn, right? And so a lot of my sense of masculinity has come from realizing, no, this turning is toward relationship, away from aloneness, away from looking at the ground and the works of my hands as identity and value and worth and significance and security. Does that kind of answer what you're saying?
Yeah.
Roundabout, long way. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. It's interesting because the divine masculine, the divine feminine. And I came up in a conservative Christian home as well. In fact, Tamara, my wife, who is now my angelic wife, we don't call her deceased because she's alive and well even in the relationship between Tanya and I. But she used to have a big issue with this. I'm supposed to submit to you, you know, and
She should have a big issue with it.
I had an issue with it. I'm like, oh, you're far more inspired. You just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I said to her, I don't need the Holy Spirit. I got a wife. You can tell me exactly what to do and I'm good. But in the end, it was very interesting because, and Michelle Powers will get this, she came back to me after she had passed. And she said, this whole Adam and Eve thing is a symbol. She said, Adam and Eve is you. You have a feminine side. The feminine side is your flesh. It's your sensuality. It's your desire to taste the fruit and live life and draw breath and be in this existence in joy and in pleasure and in gratitude. And she said, your Adam it's your remembrance. You've got a connection to source. But she said this whole thing about Eve submitting to Adam was simply about your body or your flesh submitting to the spirit so that then you're in line with your true self or your higher self, which I just, I was sitting there and I don't see dead people, but I feel them. And she communicated this as clear as day, which shifted some things in me. Because I had believed the flesh was weak and the flesh was evil and the flesh was bad and I must overcome these desires of my heart. But when that went away, it was almost like that which you resist persists. Suddenly there was this beauty and this joy and this alignment, and I became very aware of the divine feminine. I work with some indigenous Native American people, and they speak of Mother Earth and Father Sky. And in their traditions, I was taught that it was Mother who made the earth so that her children would be fed and nourished and protected and clothed and taste beautiful things and smell beautiful flowers and feel the breeze on their skin. And I've learned to love that. Now, as society, we've been in such a male-dominated society. And when I say male, that's not the divine masculine. The divine masculine remembers. Male energy is right, it knows, and you better do it that way, or we're going to go to war, right? We've now seen a swing to the female energy, which is not the divine feminine, but it's the Me Too movement that we're going to take our stand and be our place. We're coming into alignment. We're finally going to find where the divine masculine and the divine feminine see eye to eye. We come into agreement, into love and connection. And once again, it goes right back into us. If, as my dear Tamara taught me, I am Adam and Eve, and I must be aligned properly, honoring both, and that's where peace is. As society, we'll become aligned. We'll honor both in equality, and that's where we'll find peace.
That's great.
Thank you.
I'm just enjoying this. This is fun. To discuss divine feminine would take 40 years. And I also feel the same for divine masculine. And I'm getting all emotional.
It's allowed.
There's been such an outpouring of this beautiful spirit that's like, it's time, right? And I think that it has to do with both men and women who are recognizing the need and for things not to swing too far one way or the other. So I grew up Catholic in Brigham City. I became LDS in my early 20s. I had enough guilt to be a Jewish princess, right? And always there was this like black-white kind of thing. And there was this piece of me like, I want to become a nun because I wanted that spiritual side so desperately. And I couldn't make out with anybody, right? Couldn't have a husband that I could enjoy or have children. So I would have to cut a piece of myself off. And what I will tell you is that women have been cutting a piece of themselves off to one degree or another since the dawn of time. And that if our intellect is honored, then our body is not. And if our body is honored, then somehow we're stupid or ditzy. But there is a goddess energy, a divine feminine energy that's coming in and saying, I'm all that and a bag of chips, right? Because we're willing to step in, but it takes two, because a very divine feminine woman also recognizes her masculine. Mm-hmm. And last year, She Rose even did this thing because people were saying, well, Me Too, should be done now. Don't you think? It's like served its time. And we're like, from the dawn of time until yesterday, all of these things have been going on and women haven't had a voice or been able to even say no. Have you heard how many women have not been able to say no? Mm-hmm. I would imagine if I asked you in this room that there would be many women who would raise their hand, and I would also say that there would be many men as well. So I believe what has happened with Me Too is so important, because what we're getting down to is human decency. And it is not a partisan issue, it is a human issue. And it has to do with boundaries, and it has to do with absolutely honoring a fellow human being for everything they are. Every piece and wit and whittle. And I feel this divine feminine energy that is that honoring. And there is a softness there. There is a gentleness there. There is a strength like you would not believe. And I will tell you this, besides these two gentlemen, the men who brought the divine feminine to me, the really strong awareness of it, were men who had come from polygamous families, who had broken out and said, whoa, I was taught to belittle women and that they were my property. And what I'm seeing is that they are magnificent beings, but usually they had some kind of a intense spiritual experience with divine feminine that said, wake up. Mm. And they're like, who are you? But then it changed their lives. So it's interesting to talk to men that have had these divine feminine experiences, and then you see an openness and this incredible power.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, incredible power.
I want to share this quickly, and this is the masculine. When I had my accident, I was in the hospital for 5 months. The wounds in my belly, they had to leave open. And they would have to pack those wounds every day with gauze and then pull it out. It's called stripping or something. It assists in the healing. Well, at one point, the nurses were so sick, one of them began to vomit. Because, here they are with their hands in my guts trying to pull all this infection out. And my big brother was there. Now, my older brother is a first responder. He was also on the SWAT team. He's a man's man. He's a cowboy, too. I love my big brother. And as the nurses were sick and vomiting, he said, I'll do it. I'll take care of this. Now, he started packing the wound, and his hands were not near as soft or small as were the nurses. And I'm wincing in pain. And I'm just thinking, why is he always so mean to me? And yet he's talking to me as a man talks. He's telling me, lay down. I won't use the language that we use here, but he's packing this wound, and I'm having these thoughts about he's always been so masculine, brutal. And I happened to peek up at him. And there's tears rolling down his face as he's packing the gut of his little brother. And on that day, I witnessed the divine masculine. That to be a gentle man surpasses all. I said it before, but in the divine masculine and the divine feminine, when there's love, that's when there's beauty. But I learned a lot that day of seeing how a real man's man with hard, calloused hands was packing my wound. But the tears showed me love, and that was beautiful.
For me, I think in this journey, it's not about that it's a woman or a man. It's a human being, and the spectrum of who that person is so magnificent and changing, right? And the mystery of who that person is. That's what's so intriguing and inviting, but it's not, there's no sense of, oh, you have limitations because you're a woman, or you have limitations because you're a man.
I think the gender issues, and people call them issues, in the world today is a beautiful, beautiful opportunity to get over it. Get over that I'm a man and you're a woman or whatever. I'm a divine being of light, showing up in my magnificence, and what my preference is shouldn't matter, because we're in this together, and I think it's the diversity and the variety
And
that makes
the
it beautiful.
redemption. So a few months ago, I was in LA, and I was standing side by side with Joey Buttafuoco. And some of you may remember Joey Buttafuoco and his history and what he did, and a young girl, and being absolutely unrepentant for his behaviors and everything. And he had tears streaming down his cheeks. He said, I've been working on me personally, like to the depths of who I am, like really working hard. And he says, I've made so many changes. And he was at our Superwoman event, and he said, I never saw the other side until today. And that was the tears. So I think redemption is so important. And also, there comes a time when we need to not point fingers at all anymore, because you're right. This is such a beautiful thing that's happening. And it's not about blame. It's a new energy for us to embrace, the masculine and feminine in every single person, because there are great gifts in both. And then there's that kind of flip side that we all got to figure out, right? It's the yin and the yang. It's universal. It's been happening for ages. But what's really cool is what Jeff described, is that this coming together. And I think you ain't seen nothing yet. Like, awesome things are coming.
Well, thank you so much for owning your stories, and that was beyond amazing. For you to own your stories helps us to own ours and to heal. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.